She hides in an old cottage to escape her forced marriage until the Duke shows up at her door. Chapter 1. Elara needed to hurry, bolt the shutters, stuff the gaps in the doorframe with cloth, and barricade the door before the storm arrived. 5 nights in this forgotten gamekeeper's cottage, and still the approaching winter terrified her. Each day the wind grew sharper, each night the cold crept deeper through the cracked stone walls. But then a sound cut through the howling gale outside, so faint she nearly missed it beneath the storm's constant roar. She froze, her hand hovering over the last shutter latch. There again a low, pained groan. Elara pressed her ear to the door, her breath clouding in the frigid air. "Help!" The word barely carried over the wind, broken and desperate. "Please, dear friends, before we dive deeper into this moment, take a second to hit that subscribe button to support our channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing our little community stretch across the world. Okay, let's continue." She peered through the gap in the wooden boards. Against the swirling snow, a dark figure stumbled toward the cottage, one hand clutching his side, the other reaching forward. As she watched, the man collapsed to his knees just feet from her door, his body swaying. He tried to rise, his fingers clawing at the frozen ground before he fell forward into the snow. A ragged exhale escaped him, then nothing. "Who sent you?" Elara whispered, though he couldn't hear. She scanned the tree line through the blizzard, searching for others, guards, her father's men, Lord Hollmere's hunters. The forest stood silent, wrapped in white. Just the man, alone and bleeding into the snow as the storm intensified. The sensible choice was clear. Stay hidden, let him freeze, protect herself. She had barely enough firewood to last the week, barely enough food to survive another month. Opening that door could mean discovery, capture, or worse. But as the wind screamed and snow began to bury his body, Elara's hand moved to the bolt. She didn't know then that the stranger bleeding on her doorstep would change everything. Didn't know his name was written in the very conspiracy that destroyed her life. All she knew was that 5 nights ago, she had fled her father's manor in a torn wedding gown. And tonight, she would decide if she was still human enough to save a dying man. To understand why Elara Wynvale was hiding in an abandoned cottage in the first place, you have to go back 3 weeks to the night her father told her she'd been sold. The fire in her father's study had burned low, casting shadows across Lord Edmund Wynvale's hollow face. He couldn't meet her eyes as he spoke. "Lord Hollmere has agreed to settle our debts. All of them." His voice cracked on the last word. "In exchange for your hand in marriage." Elara had stood frozen in the doorway, still wearing her evening gown from the modest dinner they could barely afford. "Lord Hollmere? The man whose last 2 wives died within a year of marrying him?" Her father flinched. "Those are rumors, vicious gossip from poison." Elara's voice cut through his excuses like ice. "They say he poisoned them both for their dowries, and you're giving me to him anyway. I have no choice." Edmund slammed his fist on the desk, making the candles jump. "Do you think I want this? The creditors are circling. Elara, without Hollmere's intervention, we'll be stripped of everything. The manor, the lands, our name. So you're trading my life for your pride." The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. Her father had accumulated debts through gambling and poor investments. Debts so massive that the family's ancestral estate, Wynvale Hall, standing for 3 generations, would be seized by month's end. Lord Hollmere, one of the wealthiest nobles in the kingdom, had offered a solution. He would pay every penny owed. The price? Lady Elara Wynvale as his 3rd bride. "The wedding is set for 3 weeks, her father said quietly. "I've already signed the contract." Over the next 2 weeks, Elara learned the truth her father refused to acknowledge. Lord Hollmere's first wife, Lady Margot, had been an heiress from a shipping fortune. She died 6 months after the wedding from a sudden illness, but the servants whispered about the arsenic found in her teacup. No investigation was ever launched. Hollmere inherited everything. His second wife, Lady Philippa, lasted 11 months. She fell down the grand staircase of Hollmere Manor and broke her neck. Convenient timing, considering her wealthy uncle had just passed, leaving her a substantial inheritance which immediately became Hollmere's upon her death. Both wives had been older, plain-looking women with large dowries and no close family to ask questions. Elara was different. She was young, beautiful, and her father's only heir, but she had something Hollmere wanted even more than money: legitimacy. The Wynvale name, though financially ruined, was still respected among the old nobility. Marriage to Elara would elevate Hollmere's social standing, opening doors that money alone couldn't unlock. And once she was dead, which Elara had no doubt would happen, within the year he'd inherit what remained of the Wynvale estate and connections. Her father was essentially signing her death warrant. The wedding was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late autumn. The night before, Elara lay awake in her childhood bedroom, listening to the wind howl against the windows. She thought about her mother, who had died when Elara was 12. What would she have done? Would she have let her daughter become a sacrifice to save a name that meant nothing without the people who carried it? At midnight, Elara made her decision. She packed a small satchel, a change of clothes, her mother's silver locket, a few coins she'd saved, and a kitchen knife. She dressed in her riding habit, tied her hair back, and slipped out through the servants' entrance, while her father slept off his pre-wedding whiskey. The stable boy had left her horse, Moonstone, saddled whether by accident or mercy, she'd never know. She rode north, away from the main roads, into the wild moorlands of Northreach. By dawn, she'd crossed into territory she'd only heard about in ghost stories. The haunted forests, where the old nobility's hunting lodges still stood, abandoned after the civil wars 30 years prior. By afternoon, Moonstone had collapsed from exhaustion. Elara continued on foot. By nightfall, she found the cottage. The gamekeeper's cottage was barely standing. Moss covered the stone walls, the thatched roof had holes, and the door hung crooked on its hinges. But it was shelter, it was hidden, and most importantly, it was hers. Elara spent the first 2 days cleaning and repairing what she could. She stuffed the gaps in the walls with dried grass and mud. She patched the roof with branches and old cloth from a trunk left behind by whoever had lived there last. She learned to build a fire using damp kindling and sheer determination. She'd been a lady her entire life, trained in embroidery and French and how to curtsy properly. None of that helped her survive. But her mother had once taken her to visit tenant farmers during harvest season, and Elara remembered watching them work, how they gathered water, how they preserved food, how they made something from nothing. Those memories kept her alive. She found a stream nearby for water. She discovered wild mushrooms and late-season berries that hadn't frozen yet. She set snares using wire she found in the cottage's small shed. She caught 2 rabbits in her first week, skinned them with shaking hands and roasted them over her fire, trying not to think about how far she'd fallen from the girl who used to have servants bring her meals on silver platters. By the end of the first week, her hands were blistered and raw. Her face was wind-burned. Her expensive riding habit was torn and stained beyond recognition. But she was free. For 5 nights, Elara lived alone in that cottage, teaching herself survival, mourning the life she'd lost, and trying not to think about what would happen when winter truly arrived. She knew she couldn't last forever out here. Eventually, she'd have to make a real plan. Perhaps travel further north to the port cities where she could disappear completely, or find work as a governess under a false name. But first, she needed to last through winter. And every night, as the temperatures dropped and the wind grew colder, that goal seemed more impossible. What Elara didn't know was that Lord Hollmere hadn't accepted her disappearance quietly. When the bride failed to appear on the wedding morning, Hollmere flew into a rage. He'd already paid her father's debts, a fortune he now demanded be returned. Lord Edmund, drunk and desperate, confessed he had no way to repay. Everything had already been spent, the creditors already satisfied. Hollmere's solution was simple: find the girl, drag her back, and complete the wedding by force, if necessary. He sent his personal guards into the countryside, with orders to search every village, every inn, every potential hiding place. But Elara had vanished like smoke. After a week of fruitless searching, Hollmere made a calculated move. He spread word through the kingdom that Lady Elara Wynvale had been kidnapped, possibly by bandits or radical political groups. He positioned himself as the concerned fiancé, desperate to rescue his beloved bride. The narrative shifted. Instead of a runaway woman, Elara became a victim. Instead of a man who'd purchased a wife, Hollmere became a noble hero. The king himself expressed concern and authorized additional resources for the search. Hollmere's men expanded their search into the wild territories, including the Northreach moors, which is how, on the 5th night of Elara's freedom, someone else arrived in those woods. Someone running from Hollmere for very different reasons. Someone who'd been hunting the Lord for 3 years, gathering evidence of his crimes, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Someone who'd been declared dead but had very much survived. And now, that man was dying on her doorstep. Elara's hand trembled on the bolt as wind shrieked through the gaps in the door. Snow was already drifting through the cracks, and the temperature inside the cottage was dropping by the minute. She had 3 choices: leave him to die and protect herself, let him in and risk everything: discovery, capture, or worse. Or open the door and finally learn if she was strong enough to be the woman she'd decided to become when she rode away from her old life. The decision took less than a heartbeat. Elara threw open the bolt and pulled the door wide. Wind and snow exploded into the cottage, the storm roaring like a living thing. The man lay face down in the snow, unmoving, his dark cloak spreading around him like spilled ink. "Can you hear me?" She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands immediately going to his neck to check for a pulse. "They're faint but steady. I'm going to help you. Can you move?" No response. Elara hooked her arms under his shoulders and pulled. He was heavy, far heavier than she'd expected, and her boots slipped in the snow. She gritted her teeth and dragged him backward, inch by inch, until his body cleared the threshold. The moment she got him inside, she slammed the door shut and threw the bolt back into place. Silence crashed down, broken only by her ragged breathing and the muffled howl of wind outside. Elara knelt beside the stranger, finally able to see him in the firelight. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in expensive but torn clothing. His face was partially obscured by dark hair matted with blood. But even unconscious and half-frozen, there was something aristocratic about his features. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, the kind of face you'd see in old portraits of nobility. Blood seeped through his cloak from a wound in his side. A sword wound, she realized. Recent. And then she saw it. On his right hand, barely visible beneath the blood and dirt, a signet ring caught the firelight. Elara lifted his hand, wiping away the grime with her thumb to see the engraving clearly. Her breath stopped. The ring bore a crest she recognized from history lessons and tapestries in her father's hall. A phoenix rising from flames, surrounded by ash trees. The Ashbourne family crest. But that was impossible. The Duke of Ashbourne, the last of the Ashbourne line, had died 3 years ago when his ancestral estate burned to the ground. Everyone knew the story. It had been a scandal that rocked the kingdom. The young duke and his entire household killed in a mysterious fire that authorities ruled an accident, though rumors of foul play never quite died. The Ashbourne title, the lands, the fortune, everything had been absorbed by the crown in the absence of heirs. This man couldn't be wearing that ring unless— "Who are you?" Elara whispered, even though he couldn't hear her. The stranger's eyes suddenly snapped open gray, as winter storms, sharp despite the pain clouding them. His hand shot up and caught her wrist with surprising strength, pulling her close enough that she could feel his labored breath against her face. "Hollmere," he rasped, his voice rough as gravel. "Did Hollmere send you?" Elara's heart stopped. "What? Answer me." His grip tightened, fingers digging into her wrist. "Are you one of his?" "No!" the word burst out of her. I'm hiding from him. I ran from." His eyes widened slightly, studying her face with sudden intensity. Then, just as quickly, the strength left him. His hand fell away, and his eyes rolled back. "Wait!" Elara caught him as he collapsed. "What do you know about Hollmere? Please! I need—" but he was unconscious again, his head falling against her shoulder. Elara sat there in the firelight, holding a man who shouldn't exist, wearing a ring from a dead house, speaking the name of her would-be murderer with his last conscious breath. And she realized that whatever she'd been running from had just followed her into the woods. Elara had two choices now: tend to this stranger's wounds and learn his secrets, or flee deeper into the wilderness before whoever was hunting him arrived at her door. But as she looked down at the ash-born crest gleaming on his hand, she understood with cold certainty that running wouldn't save her anymore. This man knew something about Hollmere, something worth dying for, and if there was even the smallest chance that his secrets could keep her from becoming the third dead Lady Hollmere, she had to risk everything to uncover them. So Elara dragged the Duke, if that's truly what he was, closer to the fire, and began the work of keeping him alive. She didn't know yet that saving him would doom them both, or that it would ultimately set them free. Chapter 2. The Man Who Shouldn't Exist. Elara worked through the night, tearing strips from her only spare chemise to bind his wounds. The sword cut along his ribs was deep but clean. Whoever had struck him had missed the vital organs by inches. She cleaned it with water heated over the fire and the last of the whiskey she'd found in the cottage's cupboard, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. The stranger didn't wake, but his body tensed each time she pressed cloth to torn flesh. In the firelight, she could finally see him clearly. His face was striking in a harsh, weathered way, high cheekbones that spoke of noble breeding, a strong jaw darkened by several days' stubble, and a scar that ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, pale against his tan skin. This was not the soft face of a man who'd lived in luxury. This was someone who'd survived things that should have killed him. As she worked, she discovered more scars, one across his shoulder blade, another along his forearm, a burn mark on his left hand that looked years old. Each mark told a story of violence, of a life spent fighting. Who was this man? She pulled a thin blanket over him and sat back against the wall. Exhausted, the storm continued to rage outside, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew she should be afraid. Instead, she felt strangely calm, as if saving this stranger's life had given her something she'd lost when she fled her father's house: purpose. Around midnight, the fever took him. "No," he muttered, his head turning restlessly on the makeshift pillow. Not the fire. Get them out." Elara moved closer, pressing a cool cloth to his burning forehead. "The documents," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Hollmere has the documents. Proof of the Crown's involvement. Wynvale sold everything. Sold us all." Elara froze, the cloth falling from her hand. Her family name. He'd just spoken her family name. Father trusted Wynvale. The stranger continued, his words tumbling out in fevered confusion. Trusted him with the evidence. Didn't know Hollmere had already bought him. The fire. They burned them all. Mother, father, my sister. His voice broke. Couldn't save her. Couldn't. "Shh," Elara whispered, though her hands were shaking. "You're safe now. Rest." But he wasn't finished. 3 years, he breathed. 3 years gathering proof. New evidence. Ledgers. Letters. Witnesses. Almost have enough to make them pay. Make Hollmere and Wynvale pay for what they... His words dissolved into incoherent mumbling, and Elara sat frozen in horror. Her father. This man was talking about her father. Whatever conspiracy had destroyed the Ashbourne family, her father had been part of it, had helped orchestrate it, had been bought by Hollmere to betray a noble house, and now her father had sold her to the same monster. The truth hit her like a physical blow. Her family's debts weren't from gambling or poor investments. They were blood money, payment for treason. She looked down at the ring on the stranger's hand, and the pieces finally fell into place. This wasn't just any man wearing the Ashbourne crest. This was Duke Ciaran Ashbourne himself, the heir everyone believed had burned to death 3 years ago. He'd survived. He'd been hiding, hunting, gathering evidence against the men who'd destroyed his family, against her father, against Hollmere. "What have I done?" Elara whispered to the empty room. Dawn came gray and cold. The storm had passed, leaving the world wrapped in fresh snow. The stranger's fever had broken sometime near morning, and he lay still now, breathing steadily. Elara hadn't slept. She'd spent the night watching him, turning over everything she'd heard, trying to understand how deep her father's betrayal ran. When the stranger's eyes finally opened, they were clear and fixed, directly on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You," he said, his voice rough but stronger. "I know you. We've never met," Elara said carefully. He struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. His gray eyes never left her face, studying her with unsettling recognition. "You look like someone. Can't place it." His gaze sharpened. "Who are you? And why are you hiding in the Northreach wilderness?" "I could ask you the same question. I asked first." Despite his weakened state, there was authority in his tone, years of giving orders and expecting obedience. "I'm no one," Elara said. "Just a woman seeking shelter from the storm." "Liar." But there was no anger in the word, just certainty. "That riding habit you're wearing cost more than most people earn in a year, even torn and stained as it is. Your hands are blistered from work you're not accustomed to, and you tend wounds like someone who learned from books, not experience." He tilted his head. "Your nobility, running from something. And you?" Elara countered, her pulse racing. "Are you going to tell me you're just a soldier passing through? Or will you explain why you wear the crest of a duke who's been dead for 3 years? Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, or perhaps respect. He glanced down at his hand, at the ring he'd forgotten she could see. "This?" He touched it almost unconsciously. "I served the Ashbourne house before the fire. The Duke gave it to me, told me to keep it safe." "Another lie." Elara leaned forward. "I heard you in your fever. Heard you speak about your father, your mother, your sister. About gathering evidence against Hollmere," and she swallowed hard, "and Wynvale." The name hung between them like a blade. The stranger went very still. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. "What's your surname?" Elara opened her mouth to lie, but something about the way he looked at her, the pain and rage and desperate calculation in those gray eyes, made the false name die on her lips. Before she could answer, a sound drifted through the morning air, distant but distinct. A howl, then another, closer. Not wolves, hunting dogs. The candle on the table guttered and went out, plunging the room into the gray half-light of dawn. The stranger's hand shot out and gripped her wrist, his eyes locked on the door. "They've found me, dear friends. If you're still here and loving the story so far, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss a chapter. Like the video to help us reach more audience. And tell me in the comments, who are you rooting for right now?" Chapter 3. Secrets Beneath the Ashes. The dogs never came. Elara and Ciaran, she'd stopped pretending not to know his name, sat frozen for what felt like hours, listening to the distant baying fade into silence. Either the hunters had lost the trail, or the fresh snow had covered his tracks. When gray morning light finally filled the cottage, Ciaran tried to stand. He made it 3 steps before his legs buckled. Elara caught him before he hit the floor, his weight nearly taking them both down. "You're not going anywhere. They'll come back," he ground out through clenched teeth. "When they realize I'm not in the next village, they'll search every structure within a day's ride. Then you'll need your strength to run." She half-dragged him back to the makeshift bedding by the fire. "Right now, you can barely walk." He wanted to argue she could see it in the stubborn set of his jaw, but his body betrayed him. Within minutes, he'd fallen back into exhausted sleep. Elara waited until his breathing evened, then slipped outside. The world was transformed. Fresh snow covered everything in pristine white, making the forest look almost peaceful. Almost. Because surrounding the cottage, visible in the unmarked snow, were footprints, boot prints, multiple sets. They circled the cottage completely, coming close enough to peer through gaps in the shutters before retreating back into the trees. Someone had been here, watching, listening, and they'd left without forcing entry. Why? A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She hurried to gather firewood, her mind racing. Perhaps the hunters weren't certain anyone was inside. Perhaps they'd gone for reinforcements. Perhaps they'd return with enough men to... Her foot caught on something half buried in snow near the woodpile. Ciaran's torn coat, the one she'd removed to tend his wounds. She picked it up, intending to bring it inside to mend, when she felt the weight in the inner pocket. Elara glanced back at the cottage. Through the window, she could see Ciaran still unconscious by the fire. Her hands moved to the pocket before she could stop herself. Inside was a leather packet, sealed with wax and wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the elements. The seal bore no crest, just a plain stamp. Her fingers trembled as she broke it open. Letters. At least a dozen, in different hands, on different paper. She unfolded the first and began to read. Lord Hollmere has agreed to the terms. The Ashbourne evidence will be destroyed in exchange for Crown assurances that his previous indiscretions will be overlooked. Lord Wynvale will provide the necessary access. Elara's vision blurred. She forced herself to keep reading. The fire must appear accidental. All members of the household. No survivors to contest the claim that the Duke was reckless with lamp oil. The next letter was in her father's handwriting. She recognized it immediately. Hollmere insists the girl must die as well. The Duke's sister knows too much. I have arranged for the servants to be sent away that evening. What happens after is not my concern. Elara's hands shook so violently the papers rustled. Her father hadn't just betrayed the Ashbournes. He'd helped plan their murders, had arranged for them to burn alive. What are you reading? The voice was cold as winter frost. Elara spun around. Ciaran stood 10 feet away, one hand pressed to his wounded side, the other gripping a heavy branch like a club. His gray eyes were fixed on the letters in her hands. Those are mine, he said quietly. Too quietly. I was just... Elara stumbled backward, clutching the letters. Just what? He advanced on her, each step measured despite his obvious pain. Just rifling through my belongings? Just reading correspondence that people died to protect? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Who are you? He was close enough now that she could see the rage burning beneath the fever-bright sheen in his eyes. And don't tell me you're no one. You recognized the name Wynvale last night. You went pale as death when I said it. Elara's back hit the cottage wall. She had nowhere to run. Tell me. Ciaran braced one hand against the wall beside her head, trapping her. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his fever-warm skin, could see the scar on his temple up close, could count the shades of gray in his eyes. Who are you? The words came out in a whisper. Lady Elara Wynvale. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. Then something terrible crossed his face: recognition, fury, and something that looked almost like betrayal. Edmund Wynvale's daughter, he said flatly. Yes. The one promised to Lord Hollmere. Her throat closed. Yes. So you ran from your wedding. His voice was soft, dangerous. Ran from marrying the man who murdered my family. The man your father helped commit treason and mass murder. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek. Tell me, Lady Elara, did your father send you to finish what the fire started? Are you here to make sure the last Ashbourne finally dies? No, the word burst out of her. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what my father had done until I read these letters just now. I ran because Hollmere kills his wives. I ran to save my own life. Not because of you or your family or any of this. She was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know, she repeated. I didn't know. Ciaran stared at her, searching her face for any trace of deception. Whatever he saw there made something in his expression shift. You really didn't know, he said, wonder and horror mixing in his tone. Your father never told you. He told me nothing except that I was sold to pay his debts. Elara's voice cracked. I thought he was weak, desperate. I never imagined he was, that he'd murdered an entire noble house for profit. Ciaran finished quietly. The words hung between them like a guillotine blade. Before either could speak again, a new sound cut through the morning air. Not dogs this time. Hooves. Multiple horses, moving fast through the forest. Ciaran's head snapped toward the sound, his soldier's instincts taking over. How many horses did you arrive on? 1. But she collapsed a mile from here days ago. Then those aren't yours. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the cottage. And they're not here by accident. Move. Now. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Circle. They barely made it inside before voices carried through the trees. Search every structure. The Duke's man said he was wounded. He couldn't have gone far. Ciaran's hand clamped over Elara's mouth as she started to speak. He pointed downward with his other hand, to a gap in the floorboards she'd never noticed. A root cellar. She shook her head frantically. There was no way they'd both fit in that narrow space. But Ciaran was already pulling up the hidden door, revealing a cramped earthen hollow barely 4 feet deep. Get in, he mouthed. The hoofbeats were closer now, right outside the cottage. Elara dropped into the cellar, the damp earth cold against her back. A second later, Ciaran lowered himself in after her, pulling the door shut above them. Darkness swallowed them whole. The space was impossibly small. Elara found herself pressed against Ciaran's chest, his body a wall of heat in the freezing underground. She could feel his heart hammering against her cheek, could feel every breath he took. His arms came around her, whether to comfort or simply because there was nowhere else to put them, she couldn't tell. Above, boots thundered across the cottage floor. Nothing here but old supplies. Check everywhere. Under the bed, behind the furniture. Furniture scraped across wood. Something crashed her water bucket, probably. Elara held her breath, acutely aware of how loud even breathing sounded in the confined space. Ciaran's hand moved to the back of her head, pressing her face against his shoulder, muffling any sound. The gesture was protective, almost tender, and it made something tighten in her chest. Fresh ashes in the fireplace, a different voice said. Someone's been here recently. Could be travelers. These old cottages see use every winter. Lord Hollmere wants every possibility investigated. He's convinced the Duke is somewhere on the moors. Silence. Then, the Duke's been dead 3 years. Apparently not dead enough. Hollmere's offering 100 gold sovereigns for information leading to his capture. Double that for his body. The footsteps moved closer. Directly above them now. Elara felt Ciaran tense, his hand sliding to the knife at his belt. A board creaked. Someone was standing on the cellar door. Elara's hand found Ciaran's chest, fingers curling into his shirt. She couldn't see his face in the darkness, but she felt his breath against her hair, warm and steady, despite the danger. His free hand covered hers, holding it against his heart. Nothing here, the voice above them finally said. Let's check the other structures. The footsteps retreated, voices faded, hoofbeats thundered away into the distance. Neither of them moved for a long time. They're gone, Ciaran finally whispered, his voice rough against her ear. But still, they didn't move. Elara became aware of how their bodies fit together in the cramped space, how her hands were still pressed against his chest, how his arms had tightened around her. In the absolute darkness, every other sense sharpened. The scent of him, leather and smoke, and something wild. The heat of his skin through his shirt, the barely controlled tension in his muscles. Elara, he breathed. And the way he said her name like a confession, like a curse, made her shiver. We should go up, she managed. We should. Neither moved. Then his hand brushed against her face, his thumb tracing her jaw in the darkness. I need to tell you something. Tell me, above ground, where I can breathe. But Ciaran's grip tightened. I've been tracking Hollmere for 3 years. I know his routines, his properties, his schedule. I know he's hosting a winter masquerade in 3 weeks, the same night you were supposed to marry him. Elara went rigid. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm going to kill him that night. His voice was cold, matter of fact. I have enough evidence to destroy him politically, but he'll use his wealth and influence to escape justice. The only way to ensure he pays for what he did to my family is to end him myself. No, the word came out strangled. You can't. I can. I will. He paused. And you're going to help me? Absolutely not. You were supposed to be his bride. You can get me into the manor, into the masquerade, close enough to, I won't be part of murder. Elara tried to pull away, but there was nowhere to go in the confined space. I ran from death. I won't help you deliver it. Even to the man who would have poisoned you within a year? Ciaran's voice was harsh now. Even to the man who burned my sister alive? Who killed my parents? Who's destroyed countless lives for profit and power? There has to be another way. The law, the courts, are bought and paid for by men like Hollmere. His laugh was bitter. You think justice exists for people like us? Your father helped commit treason and murder. And where is he now? Drinking himself to death in comfort while my family rots in the ground. The truth of his words cut deep. I know my father is a monster, but that doesn't mean peace cannot exist where evil reigns. Ciaran interrupted. You can hide from that truth, but it will find you eventually. Hollmere won't stop searching for you. He's already offered a fortune for information. How long before someone recognizes you? How long before you're dragged back to become his third dead wife? Elara's breath came in short gasps. So my choices are, help you kill him or die myself. Your choices are, stand with me and fight, or keep running until there's nowhere left to hide. They finally climbed out of the cellar into the gray morning light. The cottage was a mess, furniture overturned, supplies scattered, but they were alive. Elara rebuilt the fire in silence, while Ciaran barricaded the door. Neither spoke about what had been said in the darkness below. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered moors in shades of rose and gold, Elara found herself sitting by the fire with Ciaran beside her. His fever had returned, though he tried to hide it. She'd forced him to drink water and eat the last of the dried berries. I won't help you kill him, she said quietly, but I won't stop you either. Ciaran looked at her, surprise flickering in his gray eyes. Why? Because you're right. There is no justice for men like Hollmere. And because, she swallowed hard, because your family deserves peace, even if I can't have it. Something in his expression softened. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand and raised it to his lips. The kiss was feather-light, barely a brush of warmth against her knuckles, but it sent fire racing through her veins. Thank you, he whispered against her skin. Elara looked at their joined hands, at the man who'd been dead for 3 years and was now very much alive, at the impossible situation they'd found themselves in. And she wondered if she'd found safety in this crumbling cottage with a ghost seeking vengeance, or if she'd simply traded one form of ruin for another. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Circle. They barely made it inside before voices carried through the trees. Search every structure. The Duke's man said he was wounded. He couldn't have gone far. Ciaran's hand clamped over Elara's mouth as she started to speak. He pointed downward with his other hand, to a gap in the floorboards she'd never noticed. A root cellar. She shook her head frantically. There was no way they'd both fit in that narrow space. But Ciaran was already pulling up the hidden door, revealing a cramped earthen hollow barely 4 feet deep. Get in, he mouthed. The hoofbeats were closer now, right outside the cottage. Elara dropped into the cellar, the damp earth cold against her back. A second later, Ciaran lowered himself in after her, pulling the door shut above them. Darkness swallowed them whole. The space was impossibly small. Elara found herself pressed against Ciaran's chest, his body a wall of heat in the freezing underground. She could feel his heart hammering against her cheek, could feel every breath he took. His arms came around her, whether to comfort or simply because there was nowhere else to put them. She couldn't tell. Above, boots thundered across the cottage floor. Nothing here but old supplies. Check everywhere. Under the bed, behind the furniture. Furniture scraped across wood. Something crashed her water bucket, probably. Elara held her breath, acutely aware of how loud even breathing sounded in the confined space. Ciaran's hand moved to the back of her head, pressing her face against his shoulder, muffling any sound. The gesture was protective, almost tender, and it made something tighten in her chest. Fresh ashes in the fireplace, a different voice said. Someone's been here recently. Could be travelers. These old cottages see use every winter. Lord Hollmere wants every possibility investigated. He's convinced the Duke is somewhere on the moors. Silence. Then, the Duke's been dead 3 years. Apparently not dead enough. Hollmere's offering 100 gold sovereigns for information leading to his capture. Double that for his body. The footsteps moved closer, directly above them now. Elara felt Ciaran tense, his hand sliding to the knife at his belt. A board creaked. Someone was standing on the cellar door. Elara's hand found Ciaran's chest, fingers curling into his shirt. She couldn't see his face in the darkness, but she felt his breath against her hair, warm and steady despite the danger. His free hand covered hers, holding it against his heart. "Nothing here," the voice above them finally said. "Let's check the other structures." The footsteps retreated. Voices faded. Hoofbeats thundered away into the distance. Neither of them moved for a long time. "They're gone," Ciaran finally whispered, his voice rough against her ear. But still, they didn't move. Elara became aware of how their bodies fit together in the cramped space, how her hands were still pressed against his chest, how his arms had tightened around her. In the absolute darkness, every other sense sharpened. The scent of him, leather and smoke and something wild, the heat of his skin through his shirt, the barely controlled tension in his muscles. "Elara," he breathed, and the way he said her name like a confession, like a curse, made her shiver. "We should go up," she managed. "We should." Neither moved. Then his hand brushed against her face, his thumb tracing her jaw in the darkness. "I need to tell you something. Tell me above ground, where I can breathe." But Ciaran's grip tightened. "I've been tracking Hollmere for 3 years. I know his routines, his properties, his schedule. I know he's hosting a winter masquerade in 3 weeks, the same night you were supposed to marry him." Elara went rigid. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm going to kill him that night." His voice was cold, matter of fact. "I have enough evidence to destroy him politically, but he'll use his wealth and influence to escape justice. The only way to ensure he pays for what he did to my family is to end him myself." "No." The word came out strangled. "You can't." "I can. I will." He paused. "And you're going to help me?" "Absolutely not. You were supposed to be his bride. You can get me into the manor, into the masquerade, close enough to, I won't be part of murder." Elara tried to pull away, but there was nowhere to go in the confined space. "I ran from death. I won't help you deliver it. Even to the man who would have poisoned you within a year?" Ciaran's voice was harsh now. "Even to the man who burned my sister alive? Who killed my parents? Who's destroyed countless lives for profit and power? There has to be another way. The law, the courts, are bought and paid for by men like Hollmere." His laugh was bitter. "You think justice exists for people like us? Your father helped commit treason and murder, and where is he now? Drinking himself to death in comfort, while my family rots in the ground." The truth of his words cut deep. "I know my father is a monster, but that doesn't mean peace cannot exist where evil reigns," Ciaran interrupted. "You can hide from that truth, but it will find you eventually. Hollmere won't stop searching for you. He's already offered a fortune for information. How long before someone recognizes you? How long before you're dragged back to become his third, dead wife?" Elara's breath came in short gasps. "So my choices are help you kill him, or die myself? Your choices are stand with me and fight, or keep running until there's nowhere left to hide." They finally climbed out of the cellar, into the gray morning light. The cottage was a mess. Furniture overturned, supplies scattered. But they were alive. Elara rebuilt the fire in silence, while Ciaran barricaded the door. Neither spoke about what had been said in the darkness below. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered moors in shades of rose and gold, Elara found herself sitting by the fire with Ciaran beside her. His fever had returned, though he tried to hide it. She'd forced him to drink water and eat the last of the dried berries. "I won't help you kill him," she said quietly. "But I won't stop you either." Ciaran looked at her, surprise flickering in his gray eyes. "Why?" "Because you're right. There is no justice for men like Hollmere. And because," she swallowed hard, "because your family deserves peace, even if I can't have it." Something in his expression softened. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, He took her hand and raised it to his lips. The kiss was feather-light, barely a brush of warmth against her knuckles, but it sent fire racing through her veins. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. Elara looked at their joined hands, at the man who'd been dead for 3 years and was now very much alive, at the impossible situation they'd found themselves in, and she wondered if she'd found safety in this crumbling cottage with a ghost seeking vengeance, or if she'd simply traded one form of ruin for another. Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. Ciaran slept through the afternoon, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion and healing. Elara kept watch by the window, eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of Hollmere's men returning. When she was certain no one was coming, she turned her attention to Ciaran's belongings, the torn coat, the scattered papers, the leather satchel he'd been carrying when he collapsed at her door. She told herself she was looking for more evidence, more pieces of the conspiracy that had destroyed both their lives, but truthfully, she wanted to understand him, the man who'd survived death, who carried vengeance like a second skin, who kissed her hand as if she were something precious instead of his enemy's daughter. Inside the satchel, beneath more sealed letters and a roll of gold coins, she found a leather-bound journal. Elara's hands trembled as she opened it. The first entry was dated 3 years and 2 months ago, 1 week before the fire. "Father suspects something is wrong. The messages from Wynvale have become evasive. The documents we entrusted to him, proof of the Crown's illegal tariffs and Hollmere's involvement in the Eastern trade schemes, have not been delivered to the Parliament contacts, as promised. Father fears betrayal, but cannot believe a man of Wynvale's reputation would." The next entry was harder to read, the handwriting rushed. "We were wrong to trust him. Father received word tonight that Hollmere knows about the evidence. Wynvale sold us out for debt forgiveness. They're coming. Father is sending Mother and Catherine away at dawn. I must get the backup documents too." The entry ended mid-sentence. The next page was stained with something dark. Elara didn't want to think about what it might be. She flipped forward, her heart pounding. The subsequent entries were written in different locations, different handwriting, desperate, grief-stricken, furious. They burned them all. "I heard my sister screaming from outside the gates. The servants had been sent away, just as Wynvale arranged. No one to raise the alarm. No one to help. I tried to get inside, but the doors were barred from the outside. Hollmere's men. I watched my home become their tomb." Elara's vision blurred with tears. Wynvale was there, saw him in the shadows, watching the flames. He knew. He arranged for them to be trapped inside. "My father trusted him with everything, and he sold that trust to a monster for the price of his debts." The journal fell from her hands. Her father hadn't just been complicit. He'd orchestrated the murders, had arranged for Ciaran's family to be locked inside while the estate burned, had stood in the shadows and watched children die. "You should have asked before reading that." Elara's head snapped up. Ciaran stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. How long had he been watching her? She started, but no words came. "Now you know." He moved closer, each step measured. "Your father didn't just betray mine. He planned their deaths, took payment to ensure no one survived." "I'm sorry," Elara whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Why?" His voice was cold. "You didn't light the fire. But my father, your father is a monster, but you are not him." Ciaran stood before her now, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I need you to understand something, Elara. When I found out who you were, I planned to use you, planned to manipulate your guilt and fear to get close to Hollmere." Each word was a blade. "I know, but I can't." His voice dropped to something raw, almost broken. "Because somewhere between pulling you from that storm and hiding in the darkness with you, I stopped seeing Edmund Wynvale's daughter. I started seeing you. Ciaran, I'm falling for you." The confession seemed torn from him. "And it's the worst possible thing that could happen, because you deserve better than a dead man's ghost seeking revenge. You deserve peace and safety and a life far from this madness. But God help me, Elara, I want you anyway." The world seemed to stop. "You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more." Elara's hand rose to his face, her fingers tracing the scar on his temple. "My father destroyed your family. How can you? You are not your father's sins." His hand covered hers. "Any more than I am my father's legacy of honor. We are what we choose to be." "And what do you choose?" Instead of answering, Ciaran closed the distance between them. The kiss was everything the hand kiss had not been: fierce, desperate. 3 years of loneliness and grief and rage pouring into the press of his mouth against hers. Elara gasped, and he deepened the kiss, his hands sliding into her hair, holding her like she might disappear. She kissed him back with equal desperation, her fingers clutching his shirt, pulling him closer despite the wound in his side. Nothing existed except the heat of him, the taste of him, the way he breathed her name like a prayer. They broke apart only when breathing became necessary, foreheads pressed together, both trembling. "This is madness," Elara whispered. "Madness is all I have left," Ciaran replied, his thumb tracing her swollen lips. Then dogs barking in the distance. They froze. The baying grew louder, closer, more urgent. Multiple animals, tracking a scent. "No." Ciaran's expression hardened instantly, the tender moment shattering. He moved to the window, peering through the gaps. "They've brought hunting dogs. Professional trackers. How many?" "At least 6 riders." He turned back to her, and Elara saw the decision already made in his eyes. "They're following my trail from yesterday. If I lead them away now, they'll follow. You'll be safe." "No." Elara grabbed his arm. "You're still weak. You'll never outrun them in your condition." "I don't need to outrun them. Just lead them far enough away that they lose interest in this cottage." He was already gathering his few belongings, strapping on his knife. "Stay hidden for 3 days. If I don't return by then, head north to Port Ashlyn. There's an inn called the Copper Kettle. Tell the owner you're a friend of the Phoenix. He'll help you disappear. Ciaran, please." He pulled her into one more fierce kiss, quick and hard. 3 days, Elara. Promise me." The dogs were getting closer. She could hear men's voices now, shouting directions. "I promise," she whispered. Ciaran touched her face one last time, memorizing her features. Then he was gone, slipping out the back entrance into the snow-covered forest. Elara rushed to the window, watching him disappear into the white wilderness. Within moments, she heard the dogs' frenzied barking shift direction, following his trail. The riders' voices grew fainter as they gave chase. She stood there long after the sounds faded, staring at the point where he'd vanished into the storm. And for the first time since fleeing her wedding, Elara prayed to a god she wasn't sure listened anymore, that she hadn't just kissed a dead man goodbye. Chapter 6. The Masquerade of Fire. 3 days passed. Ciaran didn't return. On the 4th morning, Elara made her decision. She couldn't hide forever, and she wouldn't let his sacrifice be meaningless. If Ciaran was dead, then she would finish what he'd started. Not for vengeance, she didn't have his rage, but for justice, for his family, for the sister whose screams still echoed in his journal entries. She left the cottage at dawn, walking 2 days to the nearest village, where she traded her mother's silver locket for servants' clothes and passage on a supply wagon heading to the city. By the time she reached the capital, the winter masquerade was 1 night away. Hollmere's estate blazed with lights and activity. Elara slipped in with a group of hired servants, her hair tucked beneath a cap, her face kept downcast. No one looked twice at another maid carrying linens. The ballroom was a vision of wealth and excess: crystal chandeliers, silk draperies, tables laden with delicacies most people would never taste. And at the center of it all, Lord Hollmere held court in a ruby-red mask, charming and magnificent, utterly monstrous. Elara watched him laugh with the other nobles, saw him toast to prosperity and peace. This was the man who'd burned children alive, who poisoned his wives, who would have killed her without a second thought. She moved through the crowd with a tray of champagne, invisible in her servant's garb, working her way closer to him. She had Ciaran's knife hidden in her apron. She wasn't sure she could use it, but if she got close enough, if the moment came. "More wine, my lord?" she asked, approaching Hollmere's circle. He barely glanced at her. Yes. As she poured, his eyes suddenly fixed on her face, really looked at her for the first time. Recognition flickered. The chandeliers trembled. At first, Elara thought she'd imagined it. Then they swayed again, crystal pendants chiming like warning bells. The musicians faltered. Conversation died. The ballroom doors exploded inward. A man strode through the entrance, tall and commanding, despite the obvious pain in his movements. He wore a cloak bearing the Ashbourne crest, the phoenix rising from flames, and his gray eyes blazed with 3 years of suppressed fury. "Duke Chiron Ashbourne," someone whispered. Then louder, "The Duke of Ashbourne." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Impossible. The Duke was dead. Everyone knew. "Lord Hollmere," Ciaran's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "I believe we have unfinished business." Hollmere's face drained of color behind his mask. "This is absurd. The Duke perished 3 years ago. This man is an imposter." "Am I?" Ciaran pulled documents from his cloak and threw them across the marble floor. "Then perhaps you can explain these letters. The ones detailing how you paid Edmund Wynvale to betray my family. How you arranged for my estate to be burned with everyone inside. How you've embezzled from the crown for years while your conspirators covered your crimes." Guards moved toward Ciaran, but he raised a hand. "Before you arrest me, you might want to read those documents. They're copies, of course. The originals are already with the King's Chancellor, delivered this morning by men loyal to the true crown, not Hollmere's purchased puppets." Hollmere's mask of charm cracked. "Seize him." But several guards hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. One picked up a letter, scanning it quickly. His expression changed. "My lord," the guard said slowly, "this appears to be genuine correspondence bearing the royal seal. It details—" "I don't care what it details," Hollmere snarled, his composure shattering. "That man is a dead traitor, and I want him—" "Dead?" Ciaran laughed. The sound terrible. "Like my mother? My father? My sister Catherine, who was 15 years old when you burned her alive." The ballroom had gone utterly silent. "Where is Edmund Wynvale?" Ciaran demanded. "Let him face the families he helped destroy. Let him—" A figure stumbled forward from the crowd. Elara's father, drunk and disheveled, nothing like the proud lord he'd once been. "I'm here," Edmund Wynvale said. His eyes found Elara across the room, even in her servant's disguise. He recognized his own daughter. "Elara? Is that—" "Stay away from her," Ciaran commanded. But Edmund was already moving toward her, hands outstretched. "Elara, please. I never meant it was just debts. Just money. I didn't know they would." "You watched them burn," Elara said, her voice steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. "You stood in the shadows and listened to children scream. I had no choice. Hollmere would have ruined us. You had every choice." Elara stepped back as her father reached for her. "And you chose gold over honor, money over lives, yourself over everything." A crash split the air. One of the guards had thrown a torch at the silk draperies. Whether by accident or design, Elara would never know. Flames raced up the fabric. Chaos exploded. Hollmere lunged at Ciaran with a hidden blade. They grappled, crashing into a table. Fire spread to the decorations, feeding on expensive fabrics and alcohol-soaked wood. Guards turned on each other, some loyal to Hollmere, others to the crown. Nobles screamed, stampeding for the exits. Through the smoke and madness, Elara saw her father collapse to his knees, broken and weeping. She felt nothing. No pity, no forgiveness. Just a cold, final severing of the ties that had bound her to him. Ciaran appeared through the smoke, blood on his cheek, but alive, wonderfully, impossibly alive. He grabbed her hand. "Time to go!" They ran through the burning ballroom, past fighting men and fleeing nobles, through corridors filling with smoke. Behind them, the manor groaned as fire consumed its foundations. They burst out into the winter night, snow falling on their heated skin. Ciaran pulled her into the shadows of the garden, and they watched as Hollmere's grand estate, the scene of so many planned deaths, burned. In the distance, bells rang. Guards were coming. Justice, real justice, was finally arriving. Ciaran's hand tightened around hers, their fingers laced together, silhouetted against the inferno. "Is it finished?" Elara whispered. "Yes," Ciaran said. "It's finished." Chapter 7. The Choice at Dawn. They rode north through the night on a stolen horse, the city's smoke visible behind them for hours. By the time they reached the coastal cliffs, dawn was breaking pale and cold and impossibly beautiful. Ciaran helped Elara dismount, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. They stood at the cliff's edge, watching ash drift down from the sky like gray snow, coating the world in the remnants of old sins burned away. "Hollmere's dead," Ciaran said quietly, "killed by his own guards when they realized the evidence against him was genuine. Your father," he paused. "They say he hanged himself in his cell before dawn." Elara felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just emptiness where her father's presence had been. "And you?" she asked. "What happens to the dead Duke now that everyone knows he's alive?" Ciaran was silent for a long moment, staring out at the endless gray sea. "The crown will restore my title and lands. The evidence cleared my family's name. They're calling us heroes now, martyrs to corruption." His laugh was bitter. 3 years too late. "But you'll have your estate back, your inheritance, everything that was stolen from you, everything except the people who mattered." He turned to face her, and in the dawn light, she could see the exhaustion etched into his features, the weight of 3 years spent surviving instead of living. "Elara, I don't want to go back to that life. The balls and politics and pretending. The world that let my family burn because it was convenient. Then what do you want? To disappear." The words came out raw, honest. To take what's left of the Ashbourne fortune and rebuild somewhere remote. The northern estates, perhaps, or even beyond the kingdom's borders. Somewhere I can build something real, something that honors their memory, without being haunted by their ghosts. He stepped closer, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Come with me," he said. "Leave this kingdom and everything it represents. Build something new, together." Elara's heart stuttered. "You're asking me to run away again?" "No." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "I'm asking you to run toward something, toward a life we choose, not one forced upon us by duty or debt or someone else's sins. I barely know you. You know I'm a dead man who refused to stay buried. You know I'm vengeful and broken and probably half mad." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And you kissed me anyway. Once. In a moment of madness. Then be mad with me." His forehead touched hers. "Be mad with me for the rest of our lives, however long or short they may be." Elara closed her eyes, feeling the cold wind off the sea, the warmth of his hands, the weight of the choice before her. She'd fled one wedding to escape death. Now he was offering her another kind of binding, not a contract signed by fathers, but a partnership forged in fire and survival. Freedom had been her only goal when she ran. Freedom from her father, from Hollmere, from a life that felt like a cage. But standing here with Ciaran, she understood that freedom wasn't about running away. It was about choosing who to run toward. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Of me? Of wanting this too much? Of trading one cage for another?" Ciaran pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "Then let me be clear. I'm not asking you to be my wife in the way Hollmere demanded. I'm not asking you to obey or serve or fade into my shadow. I'm asking you to be my equal, my partner, someone who'll tell me when I'm wrong and fight beside me when I'm right. That's not how the world works for women. Then we'll build a world where it does." His voice was fierce now, certain. "Even if it's just our world, in some forgotten corner of the kingdom, even if we're the only two people who believe it's possible." Elara looked into his gray eyes, the eyes of a man who'd died and clawed his way back to life, who'd loved so fiercely he'd spent 3 years seeking justice for ghosts, and she saw something she'd never expected to find. She saw home, not a place, not a manor or estate or cottage in the woods, but a person who understood that survival was just the beginning, that what came after mattered more. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes? Yes. I'll come with you. Yes. I'll build something new. Yes, to all of it. The smile that broke across Siren's face was like sunrise after an endless night. He kissed her then, soft and deep and full of promise, tasting of smoke and hope and new beginnings. When they finally broke apart, the sun had risen fully, turning the ash-gray sky to gold. They mounted the horse together, Siren's arms around Elara as they turned north toward the misted moors. Behind them, the city smoldered. Ahead, the wild lands stretched endless and unknown. Somewhere in those moors, a cottage stood empty, waiting. Beyond that, a whole world neither of them had dared to dream of. They disappeared into the morning fog, two figures on horseback becoming legend, the dead duke and the runaway bride who'd chosen each other over everything their world demanded they should be. Once, she ran to escape a wedding. Now she walked toward a life she chose. Dear friends, thank you for coming all the way to the end of this journey. If this story moved you, inspired you, or carried you somewhere far from your everyday world, let that be your reminder that your own new beginning is always possible. You are never trapped in the life others choose for you. Your freedom starts the moment you decide to take it. Before you go, be sure to subscribe so you never miss the next adventure. And share in the comments what part of this story stayed with you the most. Your thoughts, your presence, and your voice here mean more than you know.